Okay. We're live here, and now we're going to get Instagram going. And there we go. All right. We are live, Colette. So, Colette, it is such a pleasure to have you joining us as well over on CinemaScope. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for asking me, Andy.
As a specialist in East Asian cinema and cultures from Kingston University, I think it's going to be very valuable to hear what you have to say about this subgenre as we kind of explore. And I guess just to kind of start things off, how did you get into this field?
It was really a really roundabout way. I did my PhD. I worked in industry for 10 years and I was very ill, took time off and changed my career. And I did a PhD. And I did a PhD on the Giallo films of Dario Argento, Italian director.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of. And at the kind of end of my doctorate, you do stuff like, the implications or further study. And I talked about the kind of similarity between some of that Italian slasher cinema and Japanese cinema. And I think that wasn't long after Audition came out, and I talked a bit about Audition. So my work on Italian horror auteur led me to Japanese.
Interesting.
I know I've always been interested in foreign language cinema. We've always lived abroad, so we didn't really have lots of English speaking films at all. I've seen lots of dubbed films, but yeah, so I think that I've always liked and I've always seen like world cinema.
Yeah.
So, and I think horror fans, we do tend to be very, we'll watch it, you know, if it's from like Italy, if it's Africa, you know, it's really most about the genre and then the form it takes elsewhere. So I think horror lends itself really well to cross-cultural analysis in the way that something like comedy, I think, is much more difficult. I think it has more sophistication, although I do know people, somebody said to me, oh, I'm not going to go and see this Korean horror film because it's not what I study. And you kind of think, well, it's horror. You know, those things we're frightened of. Yes, they might take different forms, but they're across cultures. I mean, horror is about dying and death and disfigurement. Those are the things horror is about. So I think that you can find things that are scary in films that aren't from your nation. No, I was thinking that when I was watching the, I think Under Your Bed in particular, this whole kind of idea of somebody being under your bed or in your cupboard, you know, those are kind of they're kind of universal fears in lots of ways. So I think, and so I had a local video shop at the time, like video shops, and they specialised in world cinema. And so a lot of the horror films, like the Japanese films, I picked up because with the Italian horror films, I had to ship them in from America for some backwater place, not very legally, because some of them were still banned at the time in this country. Canterbury was.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, yeah, I had a wonderful, video shop, but you can't do that any longer. And so that shop introduced me to a lot of the Japanese films that I saw. So it's kind of, you know, I think I decided with my PhD that there wasn't a book in it, or if there was a book in it, nobody would read it.
Oh.
Because it was like philosophy and horror. It wasn't strict Argento
I see. Okay. Okay.
cinema horror. And yeah, and that's when, and that's when, so I finished my doctorate in 2002. That's when I passed it. Um, and Japanese cinema, 1998, Japanese horror cinema, that was when it was taking off. So I think
Right.
that
Yeah.
had a real impact on me finishing a piece of work and being interested in what was, well, what everybody was talking about, what everybody was watching at the time, the impact that those, kind of cluster of films around 1998 had. So yeah, so I kind of like bring back independent video stores,
Yeah. Right. Well,
DVD stores.
right. There's something great about that whole thing that we just don't have anymore, for sure. I definitely agree with you on that. Since I mean, give me a sense of just kind of a you know, speaking kind of like macroscopically before we kind of dig into J horror specifically. Just some sense as to why this is an important um film movement. Like why is this something that or subgenre that's worth studying?
I think I think it's kind of like with one thing and everything you do with an academic, it's about, why are things popular, why do things happen? And, you're always trying to be ahead of the game. So, and I think the whole kind of Japanese, the I think it was kind of like with Argento. He had like a group. There were small group of directors, um, who worked together and worked very closely at the time, and they produced, I think, some of the finest kind of horror films that Italy's ever done. And I think the same in, I was thinking about this quite a lot, and I think the same in Japan. You were having look, Shimizu Nakata, and there's same generational. So there's also generational. So I think that's part, and Kurosawa. So Kurosawa's slightly older.
Yeah.
Um, but there's certainly, I think, that body of um, Japanese directors who most of them probably went through training on the set of Pink Cinema. I
Right.
mean, I know
Yeah. Yeah.
Nakata did, because that was the way that you trained for the job, you trained on those sets. So, and you have got Mike. So I think you have some exceptional directors, and I think that's part of it, because when I look back at like Argento's films, it's his authorship that's important, and I think
Yeah.
here's the
Yeah.
same is, and also those kind of films, and even with Audition, though it's got those moments of really visceral horror in them, I think it was offering us something different, and it wasn't a slasher film.
Right.
It wasn't, uh, the demise of the patriarchal family in the Amityville horror. So,
Right.
and I think it was something, and I remember when I saw those films, particularly Ring and Ju-on, is that they actually moved me, that someone watches lots of horror. Actually scared me.
Hmm.
And I think there's an art to haunting in those films. I think they're about haunting, about trauma, repressed memories. But they're very subtle. And I kind of think there's also one of those things I'm interested in you know, is a kind of an aesthetic that you associate with like Japanese film, which is different to Korean film when you're looking at like horror cinema or Indonesian or Malaysian. And I
Well,
think
and
that,
yeah, and I mean that was a question that I was going to ask you is like how do they approach storytelling differently compared to other horror subgenres?
I think
Like
there's a whole history of Japanese film and this notion of pillow shots or stuff where nothing really happens and quietness and solitude. Um, and I think they work on that, that they're quite quiet films. And they also use like not even distraction, because in Halloween when you have Laurie hearing the music from Mike Mars and that kind of relationship, you know that there was something there, that she's not imagining it.
Yeah,
Whereas
right,
in
right.
these films, you don't know that when you have a shot of corridor,
Hmm.
it is just a shot of the corridor. And I think that because it's quite difficult, and I suppose academics that do cognitive theory, I don't, okay, I'm not that good at the intricacies of the brain and how it works. Um, but I think there's something about it that made it quite hard to put you had to put the stories together. You were more
Right.
engaged
Yeah.
in the narrative, and then if you look at the remakes, you can see that very clearly, because the remakes make it all about the hero, the
Sure.
one person.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And so, and those weren't films like, and films have moments. Like there's a mirror shot in Ring, which just kind of comes out of nowhere and is just, it's kind of like, I suppose, the uncanny, something that is not quite right, something that's a bit off.
Hmm.
But the horror is not. And there is a strand of Japanese horror that is very violent, very sexually violent, that we might want to talk about in terms of being particularly problematic. But these films are not those. And
Okay.
I think, and Ring showed there was actually a significant female audience for horror. I mean, there's always been. I used to go
Is
with some
that when
friends.
when you say that, are you talking specifically in the Japanese audiences, or is that kind of speaking to the worldwide appeal as
I
well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a combination of both, the
Okay.
success of it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so then you get these films which have teenagers at the center of them.
Yeah. Right.
And I mean, you already have a tradition in Japan of school horror anyway.
Yeah.
um and you have that in Korea, and that kind of Korea's horror wave comes at the same time as Japan's. It's simultaneous. So because there's people that have argued that J horror is a genre that is not restricted to Japan. So like
Hmm.
a
That's
Korean
interesting.
film.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like no. I thought to look it, because the productions are different.
Yeah.
How the
Right.
films are produced are different. Um, and like if you take the kind of belief system, the belief system in Japan with kind of Shinto, Buddhism, not Western religions, but then in Korean horror, there's a lot of Catholicism, a lot of Protestantism in horror.
Yeah.
So you can't, I'd say no, you can't collapse them, because then it's any film that has spooky women with long hair
Right.
becomes J horror.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And the problem with that is then you move into this assimilation of what horror is, and so in lots of ways that's a very, and two people have made this, so um you know critics have made this. I just think genre has a lot to do with production practices. um in Japan there's a lot of independent cinema. I mean, when you think about the films, both, and I know Lindsay would have talked about this, but both of them came from TV.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so Japan also had a really strong TV, which goes back to cinema. and
Right. Exactly.
producing cheap films to be shown at home. So it's not like the films kind of came from nowhere, but they came from nowhere to those of us in the West who wouldn't have been
Right.
able to
Right.
access those films. Um, I mean, you can access, I think, most of the Joan and the Ring kind of TV series and associated, but still some of the kind of compilation films you can't access. So I don't know. I mean, they kind of, and if you look at the kind of, I think John shows it's like the TV John's interesting because it kind of changes.
Hmm.
But I think there was this notion that you could market horror to teenage girls,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and you could use it to reflect on their experiences. You know, and one of the things I was thinking about was, and I think because all the films I'm writing about at the moment deal with some sort of violence towards women, is that really horror as a genre is predicated on violence against women. That's what it is. I mean, that's, you know, what most of these films are.
Right.
Not
Yeah.
all.
There's right. There's definitely a lot of that. Let's take a step back now and just kind of dig into the history and the roots of where this came from. And I want to talk about Japanese horror and and J horror. Before we get to that though, just like just Japanese horror in general, um tell me a little bit about like there's a lot of folklore, a lot of mythology that we're seeing in these films that would lead to that would like in Japanese horror films that would kind of lead to the evolution of what J horror would become.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole kind of discussion is really interesting because you can kind of like trace it back to like creation myths and folklore, and you know, and kind of the idea that the idea of hearing like thunder and not understanding how that works, but being able to create a god that creates that thunder enables you to make sense of the world. So
Yeah,
these
sure.
things, um, these things are embedded in their roots and then they shift over time, depending on what needs to be explained. I think the difference when you look at somewhere like Japan and other Asian countries, and I think it's the same if you look at indigenous horror as well,
Hmm.
um, is that, oh God, I've lost my train of thought. Um, Sorry.
No, that's okay. Just like the roots and indigenous horror
Yeah,
and
yeah. So I mean, I think it's the idea that we're not separate to the land. There's a
hmm
unity,
yeah.
and a lot of the horror comes from the unity. And so one of the things I always think about Japanese film, and I used to play role-playing games, Japanese role-playing games before I really got into Japanese film, um, is that there has always been this like environmental message that's come out to
Yeah,
Japan. And
right.
then the environmental message is based on this notion that man needs to live in harmony with their environment, which goes back, you know, to when these myths started, that according to Buddhism and Shintoism, that the whole world is populated by spirits. They might be shapeshifters, they might be gods, um, and therefore how you treat not just people but everything has an impact on your karma, has an impact on how lucky or unlucky you are. So that kind of sense of embeddedness in the world, I think it's very much a part of Japanese horror, and then what comes to be J horror. Because I also think there are links there with like Japanese horror video games that need a
A
bit more
whole other
fleshing
realm.
out.
Yeah, right, right, right.
Um, because people tend to talk about Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but they're not your tip. they're not your typical J horror. They're not like
Yeah.
oh God.
Are you? But
Uh,
are they? Are you saying they are J horror though? Like,
no,
or no?
no,
Okay, yeah.
no, no, no. I mean, there's a game called Kronko. Um, there's the Fatal Frame series of games, which are much more Japanese. And I think that linked cinema. And you can't, because when you look at Shimizu, he was involved in the game of Ju-on. So I
Oh,
also think in
okay,
Japan, there's not that separation, you know, directors of video games are considered directors. It's not a
sure.
separate, you know. So I think, and like
Oh,
Clock
interesting.
Tower, the
Okay.
Clock Tower film, the Clock Tower game. So I think there's a really interesting link as well. But I
What?
think,
Sorry. What? Uh, Is there a connection back to like traditional Japanese theater and the storytelling methods that shaped J horror and kind of the way the narratives unfold?
yeah, I mean, very much so. So, and the interesting thing is when you look at the kind of the no plays, which are the much more sort of upper class plays, if you like, as
Okay.
opposed to kabuki, which is more for the general public. Um, uh, but I think a lot of it has to do with traditional values. So
Hmm.
about being true, about being faithful, about doing your duty. And so lots of the kind of no plays ask the question, you know, what happens when somebody doesn't do their duty? What happens
Yeah.
when somebody oversteps the bounds of their class? And you had quite a lot of the ghosts in those films, and the monsters were male. But then when it gets transcribed to film, the monsters become female.
Hmm.
You know, so the ghost becomes female.
Interesting.
Um,
Interesting.
and 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 so that's a really interesting way. If you look at like 1960s horror, where it was still quite kind of traditional in terms of, you know, uh, working within traditional ghost stories. But I think when you kind of get more recent, things shift quite a lot.
Yeah.
So I just, I think it's a very difficult in terms of, you know, what is it's so if you look at, say, 1940, 50 Japanese horror, that's kind of World War II, that's what's happening in the Pacific, that's Japan as a colonial power. And so the anxieties around those are different. So pre the end of World War II and pre the US going into Japan, a lot of the plays were set in were period. They were period films. They were to do with
Right. Right.
samurais,
Right.
because of course samurai is not only the iconic Japanese character, but also that loyalty to the master
Right. Right. Right.
is really important in those films. So a lot of those films are not contemporary, but after World War II, after um, it ended, the occupying US said that you couldn't produce any period films, you couldn't produce any films with the emperor in it. And you have to remember the emperor as head of the country goes way back to the creation myth. So
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
emperor as something that's holy, and your relationship to him can't be broken. That so then directors had to start making contemporary horror. So
Okay.
I think in a way that
So that was
probably,
the shift.
yeah, I think that was the shift, that you couldn't make these sort of films any longer. So you
Yeah.
had to make something that was more modern.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
horror, yeah, I mean, really modern kind of horror sort of 1950s, 1960s. A lot of us take like Psycho and Peeping Tom is like, you know, and then you've got Mario Bava, The Girl Who Knew Too Much in 1962. So you have a kind of a lot of films, like modern horror films of that age, but I think they react to what's happening in the country. And I also think with Japan is that it's very difficult to, like when I watch Korean horror, you have that trauma of the occupation. You have the
Yeah.
trauma of the Gwangju massacres, you have all these multiple traumas. In Japan, trauma doesn't work in quite the same way. And
Hmm.
because you have this overarching narrative of like victimhood as a way of kind of mitigating what happens in World War II, it becomes very difficult, I think, for Japanese horror to really deal with the past in a really direct or meaningful way. I think it's particularly difficult.
Well, how did that? So, I mean, it's an interesting shift that they had there in kind of the evolution of the way that they could depict their horror films and everything.
Mhm.
That that was kind of post World War II. How do we get to a place where suddenly we have what we're calling J horror? Like, what was that evolution from that period to kind of I'll call it more modern, but
Yeah,
just like kind of the late 90s period when it actually became its own kind of subgenre of Japanese horror.
yeah. I mean, I think probably, and I haven't done this in terms of Japanese cinema, but looked at it in terms of Korean popular culture. I think once kind of people are able to have discussions online about things, then things get much more of a they get passed around much quicker, so things take off much quicker. I mean, I don't what leads to Ring, I really don't, that's a question I don't know. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that comes from Suzuki's book, which was hugely successful. Um,
I mean, were there
and
changes in Japanese society at the time that kind of led to those?
I think, I mean, there's certainly what you could certainly see, and I think we're seeing that now as well, shifts in relationships and shifts in
Yeah.
how we view ourselves in society. There was a shift towards, well, there's always been the tension. There's always a tension in collectivist societies with individualism. So there's always that tension.
Sure.
We're not collectivists in the UK. We don't care. um, I think that's when people lived in communities, they do, but we never really saw ourselves as part of a bigger picture, or having those kind of things we had to do. But in Japan that was different. So as like a woman, a girl, you're meant to be a wife and a daughter, dutiful daughter, good wife. So and I think what we're seeing people challenging those very strict gender roles in which women have a really prescribed place. I
Hmm.
mean, it's interesting
Okay.
when you look at those films that they are female centered.
Right.
Um, they both deal with abuse against women in very
Yeah.
simple terms. I mean, Japan, I mean, horror does do that. Horror is about, a lot of horror is about violence against women, but a lot of horror is about critiquing violence against women. So it's this contradictory thing. So the films are kind of critiquing. The problem with Ring is that Nagata doesn't stay true to the book. So in the book, she's murdered because she's a third sex.
Do-
So yeah, so it's her gender
yeah.
that causes her death. It's not the Korean version of it, the ring virus, is much closer to the book. So
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
yeah, it takes that kind of gender narrative and deals with it directly. So I think that there is this kind of young people wanting more, not wanting to be so restricted to those particular roles of the family, of the community, of the state, and
Right.
trying to um, find your own identity. And I think so, 80, 1992, 20 years ago. Um, so the directors, I really don't remember how old the director, I think they were like 20s, perhaps 30s at the most. So the directors were fairly young as well. So it
Yeah.
would be also about the director's own experiences of growing up,
I see.
you
Yeah.
know, their kind of perspective on how things were shifting. But there's definitely been those shifts. We see those shifts in a lot of East and Southeast Asian countries where young people want to be themselves,
Yeah.
and
Right. Yeah.
they don't want to be restricted to those kind of roles.
So it's really an evolution of just the society as those young people have grown up and they've been perhaps looking for something more and different and a way
Yeah.
to stand out from everything. Is there do I mean do Japanese does Japanese horror still exist as its own separate overarching genre next to J horror? Like, are they two separate things now, or did Japanese horror just kind of turn into J horror, and now there's really no separation between them?
I would kind of say the latter. I mean,
Okay,
I think it was just Japanese horror, and then J
yeah,
horror became J horror was a marketing ploy.
right. It's really just it's just it's just an easier way to say it, I suppose. But really, it's just Japanese horror. It's just the shift
Yeah,
in Japanese horror that happened in that late mid to late 90s that kind of created a new direction for the genre as a whole.
yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Same
Okay.
with Korean horror. Korean horror is called K horror
Yeah,
now.
K-horror,
Doesn't matter what
exactly,
the
right.
film is. And Indonesian horror is I horror. So
Yeah, right.
um, I think it was like a catchy. This kind of, I don't know if Tran was first place to do it, but this idea of putting your country's initial before something, um, it's a huge like marketing ploy,
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
it's like the J signals like exoticism and difference and
Yeah,
it's
right,
not
right.
horror, but it's J horror.
Right. It gives well, and and I guess that's the interesting thing about how we end up coming up with these different ways to describe all these various subgenres or types of films. I mean, that's just the nature of categorization, right? It's just
It
like
is.
whoever is came up with that J horror, abbreviated name for Japanese horror first, kind of ended up creating a new subgenre or a new direction for J horror, saying this is like we've noticed a
Mhm,
shift in the way Japanese
mhm.
horror has moved. This is that reflection of it.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And
It's
I also,
interesting. Yeah, really
yeah, and I
interesting.
also think there's also like the popularity of anime and um, like video games. So cinema doesn't come from nowhere.
Yeah, true.
There is already stuff there. So I think sometimes we put cinema in isolation, but as I said with J horror, you can't because it's TV. That's where it begins.
Well,
That's
same
what
with
I think
anime,
most of
right?
us would argue. Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
this is it, isn't it?
yeah,
Um, but I think, and it just becomes an easy like K culture, K pop, K fashion.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, you
It's
know,
all in the marketing. It's all in the marketing.
it is, but then I remember at the time I watched all those films. I bought all the remakes. I bought the dreadful remakes of Pulse. I watched them. I used to teach remakes, so they were kind of useful
It's
for that.
yeah, yeah, right,
Um,
right.
but I consumed them all. I was part of it. Now I was
Yeah.
teaching a horror module I was at Buckinghamshire New University College, which was my first proper job. And I taught a horror course, so I could teach Japanese horror, and that again I started there in 2002. So again, it was on the cusp of, it was interesting. I heard Kurosawa, who's slightly old, I think slightly older. He's was 70 this week, um, talking about Pulse and saying that he made the film when society was a lot happier than it was today. And he said
Really
yeah, he
interesting.
was like, I wouldn't make such a dark film,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
because
funny.
Pulse is such a dark film. Um, and it's kind of, but it's also what is horror, you know, it's Kurosawa horror.
Yeah, well, and it's I mean, it definitely feels like it's a reflection of its own time. I mean, just dealing with kind of loneliness and looking at people who are starting to get connected on the
Yeah,
internet and how that was affecting people and the whole technology
yeah.
thing. So yeah,
Yeah, and I think it did capture that because it captured our fears around it, you
sure.
know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, so that horror moves and technology allows horror to move in ways that it could never move before.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Um, you know, so the notion of like you have to come in contact with something to get infected or to be killed, you can do that virtually. So the virtual brings a whole new narrative to these films.
Yeah, right,
Um,
right, right.
and so I think it's lots of things that kind of came together at the same time. But there was huge buzz about these films, huge buzz.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
especially right at that time, I remember quite a
oh
bit of talk.
yeah,
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 yeah. And I would still, you know, say that probably um, Pulse is one of my favorite horror films of all time.
yeah.
I don't think anybody's done that quite the same. I'm going to look at a film by Konda later on, who worked with Kurosawa, and it's kind of interesting, kind of stylistically as well. But I think also this film stylistically, um, the set design, the framing, the sound, they were all such an important part of it.
Yeah, absolutely, and definitely speaking to Kurosawa, that's a filmmaker who definitely has his own pace and vision
Mm,
and the
mm,
way that he crafts his
mm.
stories. Let's start talking about some of these movies. I want to jump into let's kind of I mean, I know this largely kicks off in the mid 90s, but we're going to actually go a decade earlier and we're starting with Psychic Vision Jagan Ray from 1988. This is Teruyoshi Ishii's film. This film follows TV reporter Kyoko Sawai as she documents the rise of idol singer Emi Sato and her new song, Lovecraft. As Kyoko investigates the song's origins, she uncovers a chilling truth. The lyricist died 7 years prior. Strange occurrences and spiritual accidents plague Emi and her staff, hinting at a vengeful spirit's presence. Shot in found footage style, the film offers a glimpse into Japan's idol culture while delivering eerie, slow burn horror. Psychic Vision, Jagan Ray's innovative blend of mockumentary realism and supernatural terror paved the way for J-horror boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. This was a very interesting film to kind of to watch, and you know, it's also very short, so it's very easy to watch, but a fascinating glimpse into Japanese culture at the time, kind of the late 90s, with this kind of like this idol, this kind of pop singer culture that was very big at the time, right?
Mm.
And there and we really spend a lot of time on that before we really get into the kind of the supernatural and everything. And I found that is such an interesting film and an interesting way to kind of craft this. And it's also just in the realm. I just covered found footage horror last on the
Okay.
last episode that we did, and it was interesting, like this is something I had never heard of before, and it was like that found footage mockumentary style, and I was just like, this is like, I don't hear people talking about this, and it's one that I think should be talked about more.
I agree. I think this is the thing when you're always thinking about, you know, what led up to this or what are the origins. There's always stuff that you don't, that's missed out from histories.
Yeah,
Even in
right.
American cinema, it's the same. It's like slasher
True.
films. The whole period, people talked about like five slasher films and hundreds of these films. So I think it's really nice when you kind of unearth these things, and it was really interesting to watch it. I mean, I'll be honest that found footage is my least favorite genre. I like
Oh,
avoid it. I've written about the guinea pig films. I mean, I find them interesting.
they sound
Um,
interesting. They sound difficult, but
they
yes.
they are, but like Faces and Death and stuff like
Oh yeah,
that, which are
right.
kind of the
Exactly.
Mondo films. Um, and so it's something I tend to avoid. I don't watch. I've liked a few, but don't like them as a genre. I think because I like the aesthetics of cinema, and for me, found footage takes away the aesthetics that interest me.
Yeah.
So I don't know. My students love found footage. When Paranormal Activity came out, they were all watching it in their homes, and they loved
Yeah.
it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was, it was. I mean, I think one of the things about Japanese cinema, and kind of speaking quite broadly, is its innovation.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can talk about Japanese cinema without talking about innovation, because I think directors in Japan, because there's a flourishing independent scene, and I'm not saying that it's easy, and also because of V cinema, is that you're able to do these things. You don't have to produce the same thing time and time again, so you can experiment. So, and I
Well, the
thought this
found
was kind
footage.
of an example.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the found footage nature of it certainly feels, and I guess in the realm of found footage, this may fall more in the line of kind of like pseudo documentary, right? Like it's
Yes.
designed as we're watching this actual
Mm,
news report that this
mm,
reporter is putting together. So it's
mm.
maybe less found footage, but it certainly is that pseudo documentary style that we see here. And I mean, speaking to what you're just saying, though, I feel like it's very creative and innovative for its time. I mean, I
Yeah.
obviously, there had been found footage or pseudo documentary, whatever types of films that had happened before this, but still, we're getting this film that's really designed as like a newscast, and in a way, this really sets up what we're going to see later with something like Koji Shiraishi's Noroi, The Curse,
Mm.
right? Where it's
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
it's less a
I,
found
I
footage
mean,
than
these are
more
all
a
kind of like
yeah,
cousins of the Mondo film, aren't they? And the Mondo film, part of the reason for the Mondo film was it got through the censors because you could show like naked people or people doing drugs,
yeah, right,
because it was like documentary film, so it's okay.
yeah,
But I think what this does here is it does a bit of the same. It gives us a narrative, so it tells us about something. So
yeah,
it tells us about the idol industry. I mean, I thought it was really interesting there. And when I look at the idol industry now, and I do stuff on K-pop, not that much on J-pop, but I know some stuff on
okay,
J-pop.
yeah, yeah,
I was very surprised because there's this sort of separation between being an idol and being an AV idol. So
hmm.
so actresses that have acted in AV films have found it very hard to go mainstream in Japan. And yet
Did you say
here we have this
AB?
notion of idol who's meant to be like pure and young. And yet
Yeah.
one of the first scenes is she's taking a clothes. It's this interesting thing about how they're marketing her. So I think there's this, I thought that was really kind of interesting. And whether that's a kind of it's in the idol industry, because I suspect it's one of those things that we've heard about it lately in terms of Japan, but one of those things people in the industry knew quite well. But it has that really interesting thing of her being very kind of vulnerable and very young, but also being marketed in quite a sexualized way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it has that really. So you're watching it, but you're also learning stuff about the idol industry. Well, how real that is, I don't know.
Sure. Sure.
Um, but I thought it was really interesting done. And I think the other thing that Japanese directors can do, they can do short films. Short films are not easy,
No,
but
yeah, because
they
this one's
can
all
condense
of
the
like 40,
narrative.
yeah, 40, 45 minutes. It really is condensed.
I've
Very
lost you, I
true.
can't hear you.
Yeah, you were cutting in and out. Can you hear me now?
No, no, no.
Hello,
Um,
hello. Can you hear me?
uh,
It's just the internet connection. Can you hear me? Test, test, test. Hello, hello, hello. I can see you and I can hear you.
Can't hear you. I don't know what's happened.
Might be the internet.
No.
Test, 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 test. You can't hear me at all?
No, I can't hear. No, no. Let me have a look at my settings.
Nothing. Yeah, I don't know what settings would have
I can't
changed.
hear a thing. Let me have a look.
Check, 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 check. Test, 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 test.
Yeah,
test,
no,
check,
the sound.
check,
There's no
check, check.
sound.
Hello, hello, hello. Test, test, test.
I don't know. Oh God, I can't hear anything. Okay.
For those of you tuning in, we're running into some audio issues.
Okay. Okay. Okay, in settings. No, the only thing I have in settings is the same, which says the iPad microphone, which is what it is. So let me just, camera's fine. Me, iPad microphone. Okay. George, try speaking. Sorry, that's my
Test,
meditation
test, test,
reminder.
test, test.
No, no.
Test.
I don't know. Click on the drop down. Okay. Yeah, it's not the microphone, it's I can't hear you. That's the problem. If you click the test, okay, let me do that. Let me click the test button. Oh, shit. It won't give me any options. So I don't know. Oh dear. It's telling me to restart my device. Let me turn.
I lost you now.
Okay. So Andy, can you speak again?
Test, 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 test.
No.
Okay.
I think I might have to go out and come back in. Is that okay? Okay, let me do that.
Sorry for those of you tuning in right now. We're running into some technical issues, which happens from time to time. Unfortunately, the audio was working and now it is not. So, how about now?
Yes.
Crazy. Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? Weird little things.
Ghost in the machine.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So going back to the movie now. So the film, I mean, it does spend quite a bit of time talking about the idol culture, celebrity culture in Japan, perhaps critiquing it, certainly reflecting on how it was. in this period of time, the late 80s. But it does have that shift into the horror element as we kind of like think supernatural elements start happening and everything.
It
Is
does.
there
It does.
is there a are we seeing that as kind of an interesting setup for kind of how things would shift toward where we would end up with things like the Ringu and everything else?
I think so. I mean, certainly it's very contemporary, so it's dealing with something
Yeah.
that's very contemporary, and it's set amongst young people, and that notion of kind of the ghost. And it was kind of interesting, this notion of uh, that music can be haunted. So I like that
Yeah.
notion of haunted music. There's a 2011 Korean film called White Melody of a Curse, and it also deals with haunted music, this time in K-pop.
Yeah.
So is there inspiration there? Probably.
Is th-
Um,
does that tie into kind of like the, I mean, we'll see in later films technology is being something that's haunted. Like, is there an element that really the Japanese culture really pulls from as far as ghosts can be anywhere? It can be in a song that someone writes, it can be in a videotape, it can be in the internet.
yeah, I think certainly. It kind of, that notion of kind of ghosts can
Yeah.
be anywhere. Um, and I think making it part of the music was really interesting. And I think the shift from the everyday to the supernatural is really well done, because you need to have that build up. So you have the build up in which you're learning lots of details and everything, finding out about the character, but then you have the kind of ending scene, which kind of makes the rest of it worth it, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And it's difficult watching things from that period in terms of like cinematography and everything, but when you've seen a lot of free cinema, it works quite similarly. But
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
if you look at Shimizu's did two shorts before Ju-on,
Right.
and it's the
Yeah.
same there, experimenting with camera angles, experimenting with sound, and in the short Tushu, um, it's the sound of the cat that comes over the telephone. So
Right.
these communication channels become haunted. And you would link that back to Japan's link with technology
Sure. Yeah.
and anime and these notions of technology going wrong. So you have, as I said, because you have this embeddedness within the world, this kind of environmental mindset in Japan, technology is the opposite. It takes you away from the world. It separates you from
Interesting.
the world. Um, and also, I mean, do we take it back partly to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the atomic bombs that were
Hmm.
technology? They were like
Yeah.
the
Right.
height of technology was the ability to kill thousands of people. And people are still suffering from the effects of those bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this sense of technology as something threatening, is that then when we get like all the monsters and everything coming out of the ocean to
Yeah.
defeat
Right.
technology?
Right. Right.
Um,
Well,
so I think there's that link's very strong.
well, even in this film, a we get footage that nobody can explain how it was captured. Right? It's like almost ghost footage itself
Mm,
that they're like, how, where, who is filming this angle? Like, it suddenly doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, so that is interesting. It's like the technology is taking on a life of its own, and I think that you can see that coming. I mean,
mm,
the point about the bombs is interesting because you can see how that would allow for things like these giant lizards or just
mm.
unexplained things going on with advancing technologies.
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, there are all those kind of links there. I mean, horror is about trauma,
Yeah.
types
Yeah.
of trauma,
Right. Right.
and a repetition of trauma. But sometimes it's very personalized trauma, and sometimes it's historical trauma, and sometimes
Yeah.
it's both. Um, but yeah, I mean, this kind of reminded me there's a 2021 Korean Thai co-production called The Medium. And the
Yeah. Great
medium
film.
start, yeah,
Right.
and again, but the medium does that as well because it starts with this like documentary, which is all very, and then it shifts,
Right.
and you don't really know where those pictures are coming from or who's taking them, but that shift really works, and um, so that when I watched this, I was reminded of the shift in that, so it's unexpected. It's kind of like the horrors everywhere.
Yeah.
You
Right.
can't
Right.
hide from it. Um, and it's very well done a for a kind of film of its time and something that didn't have a huge cast and lots of money, because it is about horror is about inventiveness. Like Day of the Dead, Romero,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
he had no money,
Right.
you don't have, I think that's the thing about horror is you don't have to have lots of people, you don't have to spend lots of money to make a good horror film. You just don't.
Right.
um and I think, you know my kind of favorite horror films are the ones that make you think. I mean, in this film it's kind of inconsistent, because why would the kind of origin of the curse another woman? Why why doesn't
Yeah.
she kill the men instead? You would have
Yeah.
thought that
Right.
would make
Right.
more
Right.
sense. But again, you still have that thing as woman as victim, woman in white,
Yeah. Right. Right.
um
Well,
and yeah.
let's shift and let's talk about Takashi Miike's Audition from 1999. This psychological thriller is shocking, quite unforgettable. It's an exploration of loneliness, deception, and obsession. Widower Shigeharu Aoyama stages a mock audition to find a new wife, becoming captivated by the mysterious Asami Yamazaki. As their relationship deepens, he discovers that her dark past and twisted desires have terrifying consequences. Miike masterfully lulls viewers into a false sense of security before plunging them into a nightmarish world of torture and sadism. Audition subverts expectations, blurring the lines between romance and horror while offering a searing critique of gender roles and societal pressures in modern Japan. The film's notorious climax solidified its reputation as one of the most disturbing and influential J horror films of all time. And I want to start because Lindsay had actually mentioned that people sometimes argue this really doesn't count as J horror for a lot of reasons.
Mm.
Why? How does that happen?
Well, I mean, again, it's classifications, and we all classify things differently. It depends. I was looking at something about like Under Your Bed that we're talking about later, and somebody said was no horror. I say
That's
yes, it is
right.
horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
I mean, I
it's
guess you could say, sir,
yeah.
psychological thriller, but I guess when you get to the ending, it feels like it steps into horror pretty hard.
Well, it does, and I mean, I did and the thing is that, so when I was talking about my doctorate, I was talking about Anna and Stendhal syndrome, who's like this rape revenge victim, not
Yeah.
victim, played by Asia Argento, and I was comparing her to um, uh, Ashami. So I was doing the comparison between, and so so I thought there were similarities there. I mean, it kind of like would be saying Shimizu's Maribito is not horror either because it's experimental, it's more underground. Um, I mean, Miike is a director that makes lots of films across genres.
Yes. Yes.
He's prolific artist, prolific director with a very keen visual aesthetic, and who likes to push boundaries. I mean, his work really is all about pushing boundaries.
Yeah. Right. Right.
this is, I mean, people have compared this to American Psycho and said that none of this really happens. It's just in his imagination. It's
Wow.
not
Okay.
real.
Yeah.
Um, and it's to do with his kind of guilt. I would say, I mean, are we saying auditions Japanese horror, not J horror, or auditions not horror at all?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I mean, I feel like I think the thing is like, you can look at something like I don't know, Basic Instinct, the American film.
Mm, mm,
Do you call that a horror film? Is it just an erotic thriller? I mean, there are people getting murdered quite often in it, but does that change anything as far as like pushing it into horror? And I suppose like you could say the same. I can see where people might say it's not horror because it does feel kind of like an erotic thriller type of
mm.
film. I just feel like when it gets once it kind of crosses a line and becomes so bloody and with some of these things happening, I feel like I don't know. Personally, I feel like it is crossing into horror. So I
I
would say
mean,
that it is
yeah.
J horror.
I mean, it is, and it was also marketed. It was marketed as part of, Asia
Yeah.
Extreme. I mean, we
Yeah.
have to
Right. Right.
remember that these films were also, um, you know, part of a kind of marketing, branding, Asia Extreme, and um, because people. I mean, this is like really different to Ring and John. I mean, it's not the same,
No.
or
No. Yeah.
Pulse. I mean, it's very
Very
different
different.
genre, very different in terms of story it's telling and how it tells it.
Right. There's
But
no
it's a
ghosts.
hugely
There's
influential
yeah. It's
film.
right. Exactly.
Hugely influential film.
Is there
You
is that
can't look at the Korean A Tale of Two Sisters without looking at Audition. You can't, because there's influences there. Um,
I mean, what is
I
it
mean,
about this one that
Mickey
is
likes his
making it? Yeah.
torture. Torture's
Yeah.
horror.
Yeah. Right. No. Well, yeah. I mean, this very much
I'm
could
gonna have
lead
to
into kind of
rethink. You've got. I can't hear you again. It's gone.
technology. We'll get this sorted out, everybody.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yeah. I think my Wi-Fi keeps on dipping.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but sort of the torture imagery.
Well,
Um,
and I think that's interesting because this came out like right. I mean, I think the torture porn industry over here in the
mm,
States really kind of kicked off after 9/11, but
mm,
this definitely feels like it's a precursor to that in some ways, and
yeah,
you were saying it's interesting in how it doesn't fit in with Ju-on or Ringu. It's like
yeah,
not the same type of
not.
horror. Like this is just people. We're just watching a story of people. But and maybe that's why some people also say it doesn't really fit into J horror. But
Mm,
I don't know. I think this is an interesting element that we're seeing here because I mean, I think gender you talked being an important part of where J horror was at the time. And while our protagonist is a male, the we're seeing a pretty uh, interesting character
mm,
as the antagonist, as the female that he is
yeah,
attracted to, as she kind of
yeah.
like becomes a key part of the story.
I think so. And when we're kind of talking about traditions earlier, I kind of forgot. But you have to remember, like Uroguro and the erotic grotesque is a huge part of Japanese horror cinema. Hugely. So this fits in that erotic grotesque strand in Japanese horror. And I kind of know with the films we've chosen, they don't perhaps do that. But if you look at like Frankenstein Girl, Vampire Girl, those very low budget gore films. I think there's a whole side of J horror that's not talked about very much. Um, when I get round to my second book on Japanese horror cinema, the idea is to do a chapter on Uraguro and look at like Tommy and everything and the history of those films, because I think to say that is certainly within the history of that strand of Japanese um, uh, sadomasochism, BDSM. horror
Yeah.
films
Yeah.
that go
Right.
way
Right.
back. You know, we associate with Eduardo Rampo and his novels, and um, so I think there's one thing in J horror which is like the ghost and the young group, but J horror is much more diverse than that. And the problem was because it was just down to a very limited number of directors that were talked about that were marketed all men. Um, that I think people didn't really get to see the variety. And then what happened was when those directors stopped making hit films, yeah, Nakata, I'm looking at you. um, uh, the the buzz wore off. You know,
Yeah.
Shimizu gave up John. He said, I had enough.
Right. Moved on.
So I think there were key directors, and Kurosawa is always marginal on there. He's a
Yeah.
marginal horror director. I doubt that he sees that's what he does at all. There's horror in his films, but they're about interpersonal relationships. You
Right.
know, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
like Creepy is Kurosawa's one of Kurosawa's best films, and that's psychological horror, and people say it's horror or not. So I think they were just there were these directors, and it was all about these directors.
And Miike
And
fit
then they
into
brought
that
a few
group.
other directors in, but I think I think once some of the directors weren't producing what was considered the consistency, and then we had lots of these gore films, which are really cheap to produce, very popular in the West. Um, you know, and there's some really good films amongst them, like X Cross is one of my favorite. Um, there's Big Tit Zombie, which is not one of my favorites. But it's an interesting bringing together of the AV industry and horror, and we also get that in Japan.
Yeah.
And you also have AV versions of horror films.
Are you
So
saying AB?
yeah, lots of there's
Like, what does that mean?
an AV
AB.
version, a
Oh,
pornographic version of the
AV.
Slipmouth Woman.
Yeah.
I've not seen it, but there's a whole AV industry as well. But horror in the AV industry, they do tend to use AV actresses quite a lot.
Okay.
Um,
What is AV? Is
well,
that
I'm
an
going to have to
acronym for something?
redo because you've.
My goodness. Technical craziness going on today.
I don't know what's going. Yeah, so I mean,
I,
there's.
iPads are a little tricky to use, so I think it's the iPad. But
Mm,
what is AV? Can you say what
um,
AV is?
adult video.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Oh, it's just adult video. So
My brain keeps going to audio visual.
no, no. And Mickey does use AV actresses quite a lot because,
Yeah.
um, as I said before, Japan's really contradictory. So if a horror film has sex in it, um, female actresses don't want to do it because they'll then not get any other roles. So that's why
Oh,
um, lots of these more gore horror films are with AV actresses. So the very cheap films are with like Big Tit Zombie. I think they're all AV actresses. Um, so there's that other strand that people don't talk about enough. But I think that kind of comes after this initial wave, and it's very popular. But
yeah.
people pretend it doesn't exist because it doesn't fit into what they think J horror is. Um,
Well, and I suppose that's the nature of it because again, this film is about a I mean, it's very much looking at kind of gender and relationships and the way
mm,
that men
mm,
approach relationships, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's there's quite a bit of commentary, I suppose you could say, about like how these two men think, oh yeah, let's just have an audition to find you a new wife. Like that's kind of like the whole premise of the story here, and but it really ends up kind of subverting things and kind of pushing at all of this in the way that he ends up being drawn to this woman,
mm,
but her past and how it kind of ends up kind of especially after that
mm,
midpoint when they essentially consummate
mm,
their relationship at the hotel
mm,
and then she disappears and then it really kind of shifts into new territory as we're starting to figure out what is going on with her
Yeah.
and that whole story.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, it's a fascinating film, and
It
I
is.
think, yeah, I think it's one that definitely fits into J horror as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned.
And I do think like with Mickey, he's got this TV series called MPD Psycho. It's just, I mean, it's, I think one of my kind of introductions after audition, and it's just, I don't know. I think because it comes from anime where you can imagine all these things, Japanese horror sometimes imagines stuff that we wouldn't imagine. But yeah, it's just I mean, I think he's a visionary artist. He's very much a visual artist. So Mickey really is concerned with looks, with the aesthetics of it and how that works. And I think he storyboards everything before he does it. He doesn't write a script, but he plans the visuals out in his head.
Yeah.
And isn't it? He appears in one of the um, torture films. The second one, not Cabin Fever. It was the one that started the torture porn
Oh,
craze.
was it Hostel? Was it
Yeah,
him?
he's in Hostel 2.
Oh,
He's a special
Hostel
guest in
2.
Hostel 2. So they
Okay.
wheel him out. I mean,
Okay.
it's in,
That's funny.
so as kind of, and I think on the back of Audition as well, you know, because this is a
Sure.
torture porn film and here's an expert at torture. And
Yeah.
again, you know, Miki, I presume what's in the pink or get some training in the pink industry, which a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
it's sadomasochism, a lot of it's torture.
Yeah.
Um, so you would have thought he'd be quite good at it. But you know, it is, isn't it? It's like one moment in a film that's quite short that is everybody's talking about. You
Yeah.
know, that
Oh yeah.
kind of scene, that kind of scene. Um, you forget the rest of the film because you remember that scene. It was really interesting watching some of these films again, that even more recent ones that I'd reviewed, and I'd forgotten the beginning and the ending, but I'd remembered the twist.
It's right.
Um,
Certain parts of it. Yeah.
yeah, so I think, I mean, and it comes at the on the wave. It's not a film that you can remake. It's not a film
No.
that
Yeah.
needs a
Yeah.
remake.
No, it doesn't
Um,
doesn't need it. Definitely doesn't need it.
and it
Let's talk.
wasn't.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Well, let's talk about Maria Sato. I want to jump into her film Under Your Bed from 2019. This is another, and this is, you know, going back to our conversation we had about Audition. This is another film that, you know, could be classified as J horror. It could be classified as a psychological thriller. This film explores definitely like dark consequences of domestic abuse through the lens of an unsettling stalker narrative. Naoto is a lonely and invisible man who becomes obsessed with his former classmate Chihiro, the only person who ever acknowledged his existence. As his fixation grows, he resorts to hiding under her bed, crossing ethical boundaries in an increasingly disturbing manner. However, he soon discovers that she is trapped in a violent marriage, forcing him to confront the moral dilemma of intervening or remaining a silent observer. Under Your Bed addresses the issue of domestic violence in Japan while blending elements of psychological horror with a complex character study, challenging viewers to grapple with the film's uncomfortable themes and the protagonist's troubled pasts. So, this is a really interesting film. And, you know, you've talked a lot about kind of like K horror and everything. This is another one that has also had a Korean remake
Yeah.
of this particular film. Uh, what is this one saying about the issue of domestic violence and commentary on kind of this social problem in Japan?
I think, I mean, one of the things is that levels of domestic violence are high anyway. It's 1 in 3 in the West. No, 1 in 4 in the West, 1 in 3 in other places.
Mhm.
Um, and 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 it's very high in and statistics are very difficult in communal societies because women do not speak up. You
Yeah,
know, the community
yeah,
comes to us, so women don't speak up. So it's quite a taboo issue, but it's actually a serious issue. and a serious issue which I think is getting more serious as we do. It's interesting to directly confront it in this way, because a lot of horror is about, you know, stalker violence, domestic violence, and this was a really interesting way of kind of tackling the subject, because and it was like when somebody was saying in the reviews, oh, it's not horror, and I thought, you know, perhaps, do you have to be a woman to find this horrifying? Do you have to know this real to find it horrifying? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um, you know, I mean, kind of like my past life, I worked in a firm of solicitors, and we dealt with victims of intimate partner violence, and I take the affidavits. So
Oof.
there's a reality to that
Yeah.
that I think really is really horrifying for me. So it's horror for me, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but then I put it like with creepy, with Kurosawa's creepy, is a horror or not, you know, I don't know. But I think there's enough within it. And it has this horror convention. I mean, this is one thing about Japanese horror that I was thinking, like, because he's under a bed. And if you look at the stories of Eduardo Rampo, quite often people will hide like in furniture, in cupboards. So there's this whole thing about men hiding
Yeah. Yeah.
and spying on women.
Right. And there's the stalker element. While he is our protagonist, the nature of a stalker is by itself also fairly horrifying, and it can lead to some fairly traumatic situations. And I think that's an important element that it addresses in a roundabout way. You know, I mean, I think it's only because he ends up helping that she recognizes that, you know, while there might be an issue here, you know,
Mm.
you've saved me, is kind of like the
He wants to be seen,
yeah,
and she
yeah,
sees him.
yeah, right,
So, but in order to be seen, he needs to not be passive, you know. And I think that's, in a way, the most disturbing scenes are where he's not able to do anything, when he's under the bed and husband's beating her black and blue, when husband's trying to strangle her.
right, yeah,
Um, and he only goes into action when he thinks she's betraying him, you know, when he's angry at her. Um, and so it's as much, in a lot of ways, it's as much his film as it is her film. You know, it's his experiences. But also, I mean, I think sometimes horror touches on really deep truths. And the deep truths about domestic violence is people see and do nothing.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
men see, women see. It's not just men that see it and ignore it, but women see it and ignore it as well. So it also has this narrative about, you need to do something. Don't just be a bystander. Because if you're a bystander, you're caught up in what happens. So if if the ending had worked out differently, then he would have been culpable for that.
yeah,
So,
right, right,
and it is, and you have those moments of like claustrophobia, when you're not sure what's going to happen. And then you have that like scene in the middle where she's almost dead. He takes her out of the bath and looks after her.
yeah, right, right,
Um, and so, I mean, I do think Japanese cinema does that, has that real humanness. It gets to the human condition. And I think you can look back at Japanese cinema and say Japanese cinema has always been about those philosophical issues about life and death, and what it means to be human, and what it
yeah,
means to be part of it, like part of a society.
right. There's a real humanity that we get through the characters here in this
Mm.
film that, again, despite the fact that he's a stalker, but there is this real sense of this desire for connection and this struggle
Yes.
through trauma. And I think that's a
Yeah.
big thing.
Yeah.
And I think we get some of that in our next film, which is New Religion, Keiichi Kondo's
Mm.
film from 2022. This also is a film exploring grief, right? This is a surreal horror drama that explores trauma, grief, and the search for meaning in the wake of tragedy. After losing her daughter in an accident, Miyabi turns to sex work to cope with her pain. When a mysterious client becomes obsessed with photographing parts of her body, she realizes that the subjects he's done this with before have taken dark turns, like going on killing sprees. Uh, Her powerful performance captures the raw emotions of a mother grappling with unimaginable loss, while the director's ambition pushes the boundary of the genre, offering a thought provoking meditation on the nature of existence and the enduring impact of trauma. So here we are again in a film kind of exploring some of these themes, and people trying to help each other, but you get this sense of a
Just,
personal struggle that people are
yeah,
still dealing with.
yeah. And it's all very disconnected. I mean, that's one
Yeah.
of the things that, we talk about Japanese horror, that notion of disconnection from the community, from just wanting to be seen and heard and visible, and acknowledge your existence being acknowledged. I mean, as I said to you, it was really interesting because Kishio Kondo's worked with Kurosawa, and
Okay.
you can kind of tell that because it's quite silent, and that obsession with photography is part. Kurosawa has that obsession with photographs and photography,
Yeah.
but it's very much stylistically his film. I mean, stylistically, I mean, I believe that this was completed through crowdfunding.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so it but again, like when I talk about horror and a budget, you end up with something like this, something that's interesting,
Yeah.
something
Truly.
that has limited characters and limited spaces, but knows how to use those well.
Yeah.
And also
Yeah.
how to make the familiar, like the photographing of the body, unfamiliar and frightening.
Yeah. I mean, even just the way that the photos are taken are such extreme close-ups
Mm,
of different body parts where they very much dehumanize the person. They break it down into like a person into parts, right? Like here's an
yeah,
arm, here's a knee,
yeah,
here's a lip, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Really, just really interesting. And that's kind of taking me back to thinking about Blind Beast, which is like set in with an artist. And um, I think I have to check a right film. Um, yeah, I mean, I think this notion of looking and seeing what you look and what you see, and this kind of like thing with Italian giallo cinema is you have to put together the image and the sound to interpret the film. So I think you really have to work at this. I really like the use of color as well. I mean, I love the use of color with
Yeah.
Japanese horror, especially when it goes all out. Like in the mystical films where it's sort of like reds and oranges and really,
Yeah.
really saturated. Love saturated colors. Um, so I think that he uses that really, really well. You get that sense of isolation, and then, but also the sense of the body. There's always, I mean, I suppose if I have to say, always say sort of like Cronenbergian, if you like, in terms of the
Yeah. I guess you
body,
could see
and
some of that. Yeah.
yeah, and getting down to the very origins of what makes us who we are. Does the narrative make sense? No. But it doesn't
Yeah,
need
that's a
to.
good question.
It just doesn't need. I mean, it doesn't really make sense, I have to say. So yeah, I mean, this notion. I do like this of a butterfly dreaming it's a butterfly. It's a famous Chinese saying that's part of this. So we don't know. So I suppose if I'm saying, well, it doesn't really make sense, but if it's a dream, it doesn't need to make sense. You know, so
Well,
who's
yeah, right.
dreaming this? Whose dream are we in? Are we in his dream? Are we in her dream? Are we in her daughter's dream? What is that dream? Um, and again, it does something that you don't find often in other horror cinemas around the region, in that it has a protagonist who's not this kind of innocent, young woman on the cusp of adulthood, but you have a sex worker
Yeah, true. Yeah.
without in any way, shape, or form criticizing the fact that she's a sex worker. And neither does it focus on that aspect of her job. I mean, it's a plot point that,
Only in the sense that it's the client that she's
yes,
involved with. That's really the
yes,
only sense that it
yeah,
matters, right?
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
it brings her together with him.
Yeah.
And
Is there a way that the film is exploring kind of, I don't know. I mean, it's called New Religion. Are we looking at the role of religion or cults? Is there an element to that
yeah, I
we're
mean,
getting with
yes.
it?
Yeah, I think that's definitely meant to be there. I think that's
Yeah.
definitely meant to be there. I mean, Japan does not have a religion as such, not in the organized sense of the
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
word, but it does have cults, and because the women, they're healed by this process of dreaming or Freudian psychoanalysis. Um, they then go and commit acts of terrorism,
Right. Yeah.
and so and why and so there's that kind of thing that we associate with cults in particularly in Japan. So I think that's definitely meant to be I mean, I think it's like with grief, isn't it? If you believe in like organized religion, you can believe that you'll meet your daughter again, you meet your parents again. But if you don't have that organizational structure, what happens when you lose something? Because it's also she wants to be with her daughter again.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Yeah.
and the idea of I think he tells her she can't die to be with her daughter again because there's nothing there. So the only way that she can be with her daughter again is in this dream,
Yeah.
in this
Right.
fantasy. I mean, he's a really interesting character. Has throat cancer, so he talks in a very sort of automated way.
Very disturbing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like just
yeah,
talking through the little voice
yeah,
box thing that projects through the speakers in his room.
yeah. I mean, really, it's a really, really interesting film.
Yeah.
It's really well done, irrespective of the budget. That's kind of I mean, I remember when I think came out on the festival circuit a couple of years ago. It's one of those things. Problem with sometimes independent films is they just don't get released, especially in the UK. We struggle a lot with these films. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting place to go. And he's an interesting director because I think that's what we need. We need to move away. These are the directors that made those films. We need to ask ourselves, who are the directors in J horror these days? What films are they making? I think because we're we're swamped with horror from everywhere. We're
Yeah.
swamped. There's so much of it. But I still think, when I watch something like New Religion, that Japanese cinema is just really interesting and innovative and kind of does things that I don't see in the other cinemas that I watch as much. That pushing of boundaries, that asking of questions. And I mean, Ring's about the origins of human being and viruses. And so, and I think partly it's the visual culture in Japan that has enabled this imagination of things that then comes through into cinema. So, you know,
Well, yeah, and I think that's such an interesting element with the film and just in like how they've imagined this, the way that things unfold here, like
Mm.
whatever it is that's happening, it's very I don't know, existential. It's very
Yeah.
dreamlike. It's
Yeah.
hallucinatory. There are elements to it that I think fits into horror, certainly. And I suppose you could say let's jump to our last film here, Best Wishes to All, directed by Yuta Shimotsu. That there's some of that here also in the
Mm.
way that this film is setting up commentary on society, right? In Shimotsu's film, a young nursing student returns to her grandparents' rural home and discovers that their apparent contentment comes at a disturbing cost. As she uncovers the community's dark secrets, everybody's dark secret, it seems to kind of be pervasive. She confronts the moral compromises and societal pressures that face their lives. Eschewing traditional supernatural scares in favor of an unsettling atmosphere, Shimotsu crafts a haunting exploration of the lengths people will go to achieve happiness in a society grappling with an aging population and declining birth rates, reflecting the ongoing evolution of this subgenre as we kind of hit 2023 with this film. This is a fascinating film in the way that it's kind of exploring or pushing the boundaries, kind of a continuing J horror, bringing some unique
Yeah.
elements to it.
Yeah. And indeed, I mean, Shimizu was the producer of this. And he said at the same, I think he said at the time it was released, was that um, this, he said this feature film is going to inaugurate a new generation of J horror. So
Oh, interesting.
and it's interesting. It's kind of like a direct handing over the baton to a younger director to take
Yeah.
it up.
Huh.
I do think as a director, I think there are very few directors that can be consistently good directing horror films when they get older.
Yeah.
I think John Carpenter's, for me, about the only one that does it. Even if they're not as good, they're still good.
Yeah.
Um, so, and I think a younger perspective has a different view of things. And I think that's what you need in film. You know, and as a director, you don't want to make the same film your whole life. You know, you want to
That's also
move
true.
on. Um, and
Yeah, even
I,
Shimizu only could do Ju-on for so long, right?
and I think he got really fed up. And he's just done the Village series, which is like 3
The,
films.
right,
I
yeah.
really recommend those. I mean, he's still, if you ask me in terms of in Japanese directors, it would be like Miike and Shimizu. I think Shimizu, in terms of horror, J horror, is the most important director there is. I don't
Hmm.
think any of this would have happened without Chuon or his vision. And I
Yeah.
think the
Right,
difference
right.
that he made was that his vision was over the remakes as well. So he has a
Yeah,
really
true.
distinctive vision, which I think is really interesting. And if anybody hasn't seen Marabito, which is like his upbeat independent film, really need to search that out because it's
What's it
again,
called?
it's about Marabito.
Marabito. Okay.
And it's about photography and about the camera.
Yeah.
Um, but it's very, very different. It's very low budget. It's like stalkerish, but really, really interesting. So he's a really, really interesting director. I really like this film. You know, I get really cross when people say Japanese horror is not any good. That it's just that we're not seeing the films. They're not coming over here. The only time I get to see these films is if I've got time to review them. So if they're on the festival circuit. Otherwise, I'm quite good at finding films. But you know, and this is now on Shudder. Um, so yeah, and New Religions on Shudder as well. So if anybody's
Yeah.
out there, yeah, have a look at Shudder. You like horror? It's got loads of good horror films. Um, Lots of international horror. So yes, but you can. I think they do a free trial. But New Religion and Best Wishes Tour is on there. Um, it's it again. It for me, it's the thing with Japanese horror is that you have these moments that are really out of place.
Yeah.
So
Right, right.
when the grandparents are eating and suddenly they start making pig sounds.
Right. Right.
It,
Well, there's
it,
a lot of moments that the grandparents have, like, they're just like standing there staring or
it,
whatever. Like it's an interesting element that I don't know if I couldn't figure out what they were doing. Like, is this a byproduct of what's happening? Is this because they haven't been feeding often enough? But then I was
It,
like, well, maybe that's why it works, because it's not defined. And I think that's a key element of horror anyway.
it is, and I think you don't, one of the things about films is that if you want to watch it again, and it doesn't need to be all neat and tight. And also, I don't speak Japanese. Um, I'm dealing with a translation.
Yeah.
So again, there's that layer because the translation isn't everything that's said. So sometimes I think you miss stuff that is very local and that
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
gets left out. Um, but that notion, I mean, you go back to like Juon, um, aging population is one of the triggers for that. And now we're in a worse situation in terms of, older people relationship to younger people, and we're all living older. you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's really creepy, and I really like, as much as I watch splatter horror, not my favorite type of horror.
Yeah. Yeah.
Creepy horror is my type of horror. I mean, I prefer
Yeah.
things with
Sure.
ghosts on the whole, but I find this really haunting. And her her kind of, you know, trying to escape her fate. She doesn't want
That's
to be
really what
part
it's
of this
about. Yeah.
family. So
Yeah.
can you escape intergenerational trauma, if you like, or
Sure.
does it
Yeah.
have to repeat until ad infinitum if it's not addressed?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a really, really interesting film. And again, if I had to say what was J horror, I would say it's not really themes, because we find themes in horror across the world. It's a certain style, aesthetics, and approach that defines J horror. And Best Wishes to All is one of the films that I would say is typically J horror. Those shots that come from nowhere, those moments where we don't know what's happening, um, and that kind of silence. Japanese
Well,
cinema uses
yeah.
silence so well.
Well, and it does have this sense of a generational element to the
Mm,
story,
mm,
and it's more than just like, cannibalistic behavior or something
mm,
like
mm.
that. It actually leads to something deeper and more thematic in what's happening and how it actually translates to behavior and everything. And I think that's what I found so interesting with it.
And we can look at it on a wider scale, like how can I be happy with what's happening in the USA?
Yeah.
With marginalized people, with
Yeah.
migrants in the UK. How can I be happy knowing what's happening in Gaza? How can we be happy? So
Yeah.
ask that question, how can we be happy
Yeah.
when our happiness is is like sucking off from other people's
Yeah. Right.
lives, you
It's
know?
very
Uh,
literalized.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
very literal. And
Yeah.
so I think it's very much a film of its time. It comments on that situation we're in, where we're struggling to be happy, but social media really won't let us be happy, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but it's a lens that people go to not to be unhappy.
Yeah.
And I
Right. Right.
think
Right.
that's what we're seeing. That's the struggle I have as a, living in this time is,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. It's the film is fitting for the era that we're in, for
it
sure.
is very, very fitting. And it
Yeah.
also means that, let's watch more Japanese horror films. And not just think about in the past, because I hate that. Because I think that, and I feel this like when musicians die and everybody starts loving their music, and I think, no, appreciate it whilst they're here.
Yeah.
Don't judge, because it's happened when I was working on US horror with the slasher film. And as I said before, it's like there were all these films and nobody even bothered to talk about them.
Yeah.
So I think as much as it origins in the past and had this moment, it hasn't gone away. It's still there, but it's a bit harder to track down.
Let's talk about the evolution and the legacy of J horror. We discussed kind of like the peak of it in the
Mm,
kind of late
mm,
90s, early 2000s, but how it really has kind of continued. We mentioned like international remakes, other
mm,
adaptations, and you've talked a little bit about how it has influenced
mm.
other countries in Asia as well, for sure. Um, what is the impact of J horror? I mean, do you want to talk? Well, I guess do you want to talk
Yeah.
about its how it's evolved, how you've seen it evolved, and where it's going to go from here, or do you want to talk about its impact?
I mean, I think I'll talk about probably its impact a bit more. I think that, I mean, one of the things I think is that J horror popularized Asian horror, East Asian, Southeast Asian horror. It paved the way in a
Yeah,
BTS way for
yeah,
Asian horror.
sure,
Um, and the reason I'm really into Indonesian horror at the moment. And the reason I'm into Indonesian horror is because I was into Japanese horror, and Japanese horror
sure.
made people understand that we would watch films in other languages and enjoy them. Um, I think that it it demonstrated how you could make a genre national and global at the same time.
Hmm.
You know, so
Interesting. Yeah,
that it deals with national issues, but also has kind of global implications, which I think is part of the reason. I also think that there was a while when you went to like the cinema and people saying, "Oh, we don't want to see another long-haired ghost," because that's the only films they saw that were J horror.
yeah, right, sure, yeah,
Um, and and because I think it's also influenced like American horror. So and there's like films, not just Cabin in the Woods, which have Japanese characters and Japanese spirits and Japanese ghosts. I mean, you can also see that in like Western video games as well, where you have like Japanese vampires and monsters appearing on these games. Um, so, oh, what's he thinking? Yeah, James Wan's Malignant, for me, brings together Eastern and Western horror. And it kind of it fuses the two together. So I think there's a sense that J horror has become part of A horror, if you like. It has been absorbed, and elements of it have been taken by the West and
yeah, right.
utilized. Um, so I think that that's one of the trajectory of Japanese horror. Um, I mean, as I said, the problem is that's when we got J horror is like a genre because it's all about ghosts with long hair. You know, and Asian women have long hair, so they all have
It
to
just
be J horror.
Yeah, right, right, right. Well, I think there's definitely influence that you can see across the board around the world from J horror. I mean, I know it's not your favorite, but found footage films, I definitely think we see it
Yeah.
in them. I think we see like techno horror as a subgenre. I think that
Hmm.
really has I think J horror has really kind of played a part
Yeah.
in that. You've also talked about video games. You've mentioned a few, but I mean, you think of things like Silent Hill or Fatal
Yeah.
Frame. I think we're definitely seeing how J horror
Yeah.
has kind of lent itself to a different way
Yeah.
to create scares.
You do. And what you need to remember, because like when I work in Korean horror, there's not that history of Korean film in the West. There's history of Japanese film in the West. So
Yeah,
when we talk about this, we have to understand that Japanese cinema has always been visible in the West.
yeah,
From the
right, right.
very early days. It's always won awards. It's always been, you know, lots of white critics have gone to Japan and talked about how wonderful it is and lived there. Um, so I think there's a really long history. So this doesn't come from nowhere. You know, people are
Right.
playing games, people are reading anime, people already know Japanese culture by the time these films come.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they're part of something that already exists. So when I look at Korean horror, there's none of that. No history of Korean film. So Korean film starts a lot later.
yeah,
Um, and what we're seeing these days, so part of the evolution is co-productions. and that's how things are going.
Hmm.
So I think we're going to be finding less and less films are made by one country and more films are co-productions. So
Sure.
Under Your Bed, which is a Korean remake of the Japanese film, is remade by a Japanese director,
Huh.
Sabu.
Yeah.
So, and it's a co-production. So that's a direct kind of influence, if you like, but also this notion of um, uh, directors who are not like Korean or Japanese making Japanese or Korean films, is that still J horror? What is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that I found but I think it's a co-production. It's like when I talked about The Medium, that's a co-production. I think CJM Entertainment, huge club, doing lots of co-productions because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also because there's a history of colonialism in the region, that there are elements of Japanese culture that you find across. And also lots of Japanese horror films are based on Chinese books and Chinese short stories, not
Right.
Japanese ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think people, there's a lot of shared mythology. So
Well,
we have,
yeah.
foxes in Japanese horror, we have foxes in Chinese horror, we have foxes in Korean horror. So we have a lot of similar stuff. So there is that influence there that we can see in film. I mean, in terms of Japanese film in the region, sort of Korea probably is the most influence, but Japanese film is also really popular in China, despite the fact that it has ghosts. So Sadeko versus Bunshin Saba, which is a web film based on the character of Sadeko and then Bunshin Saba in the Bunshin Saba films, was hugely popular with Chinese young people, even though it does try to get around that there are no actual ghosts. So these films are popular elsewhere, and I think one of the other things we're seeing a bit more of, and I think that might be a little bit more, but no, I think same Japanese cinema, we're seeing idols or artists starring in these um, films, and so we're seeing the entertainment industry, like diversifying a bit more. I mean, in Japan, with the AK-48, AKB-48, which is made of
Okay.
61 members. They've appeared in a few horror films that have been available on Netflix. So there's actually like idol horror films as well, um, which is kind of not a horror film about idols like White Melody of Curse, but with idols.
Yeah.
So I think there is that kind of using one popular form to market another popular film. I've
Yeah.
seen that quite a lot on
Well,
J
and that
dramas as well.
and you can see how that would kind of continue its legacy as they're finding new ways to kind of move in or spreading into different popular areas and using that to kind of expand the genre, really.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think it's
interesting.
also
Yeah.
about expanding the ways in which we see it. So, like
Yeah.
using virtual reality, like with Kurosawa and Chime, which I haven't seen yet, which is on a crypto platform somewhere.
I think
Um,
you can find that one on YouTube. I watched it on YouTube.
yeah, I think someone did send me the link to it, and I thought, um, but yeah, so it's also about horror being more immersive.
Yeah.
So was it God, I saw one, I can't remember the film it was, I saw in London, and it was like on VR, it was only like an hour. But I also think the technology of films is changing as well, so the ways in which
Sure.
we experience them.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
which is inevitable as things evolve and people are watching on different ways and
it,
everything.
it,
So,
it, it is, and it's really also, keep your eye out for like female directors, because there's not a lot
yeah.
of them. And yet they make some of the really interesting films. Like Under Your Bed was really, really interesting film, really interesting perspective on, I think there's this whole debate in film, but filming abuse through the male lens or the male gaze, if you like, is always slightly problematic. It doesn't mean that
Sure.
it can't be done, but it's slightly problematic because sometimes you end up fetishizing trauma.
Well, I think that you see that actually. I found it when I watched Mari Asato's
Mm,
version of
mm,
Under Your
mm,
Bed, and then I watched
mm,
the Korean remake made
mm,
by a
mm,
male
mm,
director. I
mm,
felt a visceral difference
mm.
in the way that they treated the domestic violence.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's important to have other perspectives behind the camera. Because
Yeah,
I think if it's something that you've experienced or that's happened to be, all women know someone that's happened to, no matter
yeah,
what class we are, no matter how old we are, we know people.
sure.
Um, so there's a reality of it for women that you're, a couple of relationships away from getting beaten up that film addresses, but it doesn't address in a problematic manner. We had this kind of argument about Park Chan Wook's how made in you know do you, when you're shooting lesbian sex, can you get away from the male gaze?
Right, yeah.
Would a woman have shot it differently? um it is worth having a look at, supporting female directors, not just Japanese female directors, but also female directors elsewhere. I did a review of a female directed Korean film a while back, and it like opened to like 2,000 people. That's all the people that saw it.
Jeez.
Um, yeah, I mean, Korea's a lot different to Japan. It's really difficult to do independent cinema. It's all mainstream cinema. It's it's a lot shinier. Japanese cinema can be very raw. And I think the rawness is sometimes what, you know, Japan goes places that I don't want it to go. But that doesn't mean that it means that it's innovating and it's pushing. And, as I said, that's Mickey pushes boundaries and changes the language of film, changes the language of horror. And I just think we need female voices in there, especially dealing with like revenge narratives about abuse women narratives,
Yeah,
um,
definitely.
which just have become too popular. And yeah, I thought it's kind of really timely when you consider the time that we're in and the needs for this commentary, because everybody watches horror. So you can try and I was at this talk about diversity on film, and the person leading it said that film is about empathy. So film as a way of creating empathy in your audience, not sympathy, but empathy, which I thought was a really powerful statement. And I think these films that I've watched, the protagonists are empathetic. You can understand why they do what they do or their pain. So even though it's a popular genre, you can still take a position and show the audience what the reality is for some women or for a sizable percentage of women across the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Colette, thank you so much for joining me here today. I really appreciate all of
Pleasure.
your thoughts on J horror and everything. Do you have anywhere online where you want to send people as far as socials or any of your books that you want
Yeah.
people to check out?
I mean, I think I sent you, I did do the form. You can find me across socials on my name. I don't have a pseudonym, I'm just me.
Okay.
Um, so I'm Colette Balmain on Instagram, on TikTok. Not that I know how to use TikTok, but I am there.
But you are there. Okay.
On Facebook. So that's who I am. Um, I mean, my kind of monograph, Japanese horror cinema was quite a long time ago. I mean, I think I wanted to, when I was going to do the second edition, they wanted me to change all the chapters, so to update all the chapters, which is why it never got done.
Mm.
So hopefully, so that is the kind of book. I've got a couple of other things that I can send you links to. I wrote about East Asian Gothic cinema, which is the kind of base of the book that's coming out next year. And I wrote something about Japanese vampires. So
Nice. Okay.
I will let you have those things, and I also do a bit of a better list of films that I think might be worth looking out for, especially more
Yeah. Great.
current contemporary films. But
I'd
yeah,
love it.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I'm always happy for people to get in touch with me and like ask me questions and you
Fantastic.
know, so it's been
Well,
great. So thank you for asking me.
I really appreciate you being here, Colette. Thank you so much. I'll include all of your links and everything in the show notes so people
Lovely.
can dig in a little bit more
Yeah,
and reach out. Thank
yeah.
you so
Is that
much.
okay if I get those to you tomorrow?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. Totally fine.
Okay.
All right. I will stay connected real quick. I'm going to end the stream here.
Okay.